The nature of attachments. Nancy Shepherd-Hughes wrote this book, Death Without Weeping, about the violence of everyday life in Brazil, where people have large families in the northeast of Brazil, nordestinos as she called them, because they expect most of the kids to die. Enormously high infant mortality rates in these very poor people. She went out as a young nurse to work in Brazil, and during the week she arrived, a woman gave a very sick child to her and asked her to take it to the hospital. Sadly, the baby died on the way to hospital, and when she got there, the doctor said, no, you must take it back home to the mother for burial. So she arrived back and terribly upset. You know, she'd been entrusted with this child and it had died. And she goes in to the mother's room, says to the mother, I'm terribly sorry, I'm afraid your baby died. And the mother says, oh, that's all right. And why are you crying, sort of thing? And she realizes that in that society, the death of a baby is not nearly the devastating event it is in our culture. In fact, when a baby dies, it's the kids who put it in a little cardboard coffin and take it off to the cemetery for burial. Adults don't usually bother much with child deaths. And this is part of the children's death education. Apparently it works. It's extraordinary, this. Certainly Nancy Shepherd-Hughes found no evidence of any serious psychiatric problems resulting from this attitude towards child death, which is so different from our own. I found something rather similar in Borneo. These are the Dayak River people who tend to have a lavatory sited downstream from the rest of the house, as you might guess. Unfortunately, it's upstream from the house next door. And everybody's plunging in and out from an early age, in and out of the river. So it's not surprising that a lot of these kids either drown or develop severe diarrhea and die from that. So they have a high mortality rate from those two causes. And I said to our guide, well, what do you know, how do people cope with that? Oh, she said they have these hooks which helps them to haul the bodies out of the water, and the bodies are put in a tree and then buried. But they don't have at all the same ceremonies that you do when an adult dies. There are, you know, major differences in both the expression of grief and the rituals attending deaths. Rather similar to Nancy Shepherd-Hughes' findings in Brazil. Child rearing practices may well play a part in this, and the longhouse culture in Borneo, for instance. Kids are reared in these long houses where you have all the mothers sharing in the care of all the children. And if a mother dies, it's not difficult to replace that mother with somebody else. There is that sort of sharing of caring, which seems to create less of a problem. Equally, when a child dies, it's not so traumatic as it certainly seems to be in our culture. Rituals attending death and bereavement. These are the burning ghats in Hindu world. It's interesting how all of the great world religions have some belief system about what happens to the dead when they're dead, either going to heaven or going to another reincarnation. Death is not the end of life, and this is clearly one kind of viewing death, which may make it easier to cope with it. But in this sort of system, the living have an important part to play in caring for the dead person and ensuring a safe passage into the next world. There are a whole set of rituals, as there are in most cultures, to ensure that people have a proper send-off, as you might put it. I visited one of the Towers of Silence in Bombay. The Zoroastrians have this belief that dead bodies pollute both the earth, the air, and water. So they deal with this problem by laying the bodies out on top of these towers of silence for the vultures to eat. And we went to visit one of the towers of silence, and she told us that her mother had died the week before. And while the car was stationary outside the tower of silence, a vulture came and looked in through the car window, and we all knew exactly what she was thinking. In Shinto and traditional Buddhist belief in Japan, you have your household shrine, which is a sort of hotline to the dead. And people will go along and ring a bell which calls up the spirits of your ancestors, or particularly the most newly dead, and you can communicate with them. And this is seen as providing a locus for the continuing bond to the dead person. Indeed, small children, when they misbehave, have to go and apologize to grandfather at the Shinto shrine. I just wonder what they feel about that. I didn't dare to pursue this. But Yamamoto, who's carried out some systematic studies, is quite convinced that the existence of a household shrine, even for non-religious people, and a lot of Japanese people are not particularly faithful to their traditional beliefs, but when somebody dies, they still reverence the family shrine and will go along to maintain contact with the dead, which Yamamoto sees as very therapeutic things, and it would certainly fit in with the idea of a continuing bond with the dead. I've known a number of bereaved people who had some difficulty in finding a location for the dead. I mean, some people locate the dead in the grave and then worry if it rains. Others will say, oh, no, he's not in the cemetery, that's his favourite chair, I feel as if he's still sitting there. And one woman was quite perturbed by this. She said, I kept finding myself looking back towards his chair and expecting him to be there, but he wasn't, and I found that quite disturbing. She said, but I solved that problem. I said, really? She said, I went and sat in it myself. And when she did that, she felt she somehow got him within her. And in a sense, I suppose you could say in a symbolical kind of way, that's exactly what bereaved people need to do. They very often find it that they can relate to the internalized dead person, the memories that live on, more easily if they locate the dead person within them rather than out there somewhere and lost. Visiting Singapore, I was fascinated to see these burning charcoal bins, usually at intervals along the street, and during the week of the Hungry Ghosts. Once a year, the dead return to earth and people are able to give them gifts. And these are the sort of gifts you give them. This is millions and millions of paper money, dollars, they call them, ghost dollars, which you can give to the dead, and you burn them, and they have a happy time. Clothing, that's paper. Television sets, computers, whatever you want, you can make out of cardboard or paper and chuck in the bins, and they burn, and the dead are able to carry on with their lives somewhere else.